views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk. After a brutal 2 weeks of protests against the governor of Puerto Rico, Ricardo Rosselló resigned. After long-standing allegations of corruption in his administration, frustration over slow and ineffectual response to Hurricane Maria, and ultimately the release of a 900-page chat that showed misogynistic and homophobic remarks, not to mention offensive comments about other Puerto Rican leaders and members of the opposition parties, the governor's stewardship of the island was doomed. Then last night, next in line to succeed the governor, Puerto Rico's Secretary of Justice, Wanda Vazquez Garced, said she doesn't want the job. So what is next for this struggling Commonwealth? Tonight's guest, a Bronx council member, was in Puerto Rico for the protests and is here tonight with photos and a first-hand report. As an aside, nearly a quarter of the Bronx's population is Puerto Rican. Please join me in welcoming back to BronxTalk the councilman from the 14th District. That includes the Bronx neighborhoods of Claremont Village, Fordham, Kingsbridge, Marble Hill, Morris Heights, Mount Eden, Mount Hope, and University Heights. Hope I got them all. Councilmember Fernando Cabrera, nice to have you back.
Thank you.
Well, this is a very difficult situation, and as I kept reading about it and kept learning about it and kept watching the news reports, I was, you try to navigate how you see an end to it or how you can solve problems. I'm not sure where we're going. So maybe you could give us your perception and, of course, what you saw when you were down there.
Well, I saw the greatest movement that I have ever been part of, and many people have ever been part of. The level of passion, enthusiasm, celebration, in the anticipation that the governor was going to step down. And the reason why is because there was a lack of integrity, there was corruption, there were many, many problems. But we got to see this, Gary, a larger context here. Puerto Rico has had decades of problems. A fiscal problem with $72 billion debt, compounded with bad government that led us to the situation that we are in right now. And also compound that with the problem that we have that Puerto Ricans are not treated equally. And they're technically what we have in Puerto Rico is a colony.
If you look, let's start with leadership. Leadership has changed. It's almost like we talk about high schools, and high schools complain if we change principals all the time, there's no way to get a standard curriculum, a standard philosophy.
Right.
That now in the United States, of course, we change every 4 years or 8 years, depending, of course, if someone's reelected. But when you have that kind of changeover, and then, of course, you throw in the cauldron of a massive hurricane, an incredibly destructive hurricane, and then you add into it that nobody knew where the monies were going, some of the monies were wasted, and years of corruption. Again, I try so hard to find my way through the maze. I don't see how it could happen.
It was a cocktail of problems. Puerto Rico only gets 25% to the dollar when it comes to Medicaid and Medicare reimbursement, and yet they're full-fledged Americans. Can you imagine that in any other state? Puerto Rico has been denied the right to become a state. Puerto Ricans, and a few years ago, there was a law 926, which allowed tax breaks for pharmaceutical. That was taken away, and there was no replacement. There was no financial strategies that was set into motion. As a result of that, you are 100% correct. We end up now having governors having to make tough decisions that become unpopular, and therefore you have the turnover, and then you have the the lack of having a leadership, that continuity. So we have a leadership crisis in Puerto Rico.
Let's talk about the protests and what you saw, specifically what you saw. And you just said that this was, the greatest protest of people coming together. I mean, there have been marches and all that kind of stuff even here. I don't, from the outside, it would be hard to disagree. And I wonder if that sense of unity, same sense of unity you got in the response to Hurricane Maria, which says a lot about Puerto Rican people. But I wonder if that's the beginnings of a way out of this. And I don't know how politically that could work, but people seem to be on the same page.
Yeah, they're on the same page, and they have not stopped. As a matter of fact, today there was a march in Puerto Rico that was set up last week to call upon the next in line. Wanda Vasquez, the Secretary of Justice, stepped down. Last night we heard that she stepped down. But they're not happy. They're not happy as to who will be next, because they were all appointed by the governor who's stepping out. And so we do have a leadership crisis. I think the solution is for Puerto Ricans to begin to voice who do they think should be the next person in line. The governor of Puerto Rico has till August 2nd, because he said he's going to step down today, to appoint the Secretary of State, which that person left. So we have a vacancy.
So here you have a governor who is reviled, obviously, by many, many people. The track record is not good. The horrors of him communicating in the way that he did with his associates and them too, that's another whole issue. And yet he might then appoint a new Secretary of State, and in essence he's going to be appointing the next governor. Are you perpetuating the problem?
Well, that's going
In other
to
words,
be.
do you expect that he would appoint somebody who could be
Right.
completely independent of all this stuff that he would bring along?
But-
It's almost like, frankly, if Donald Trump were to appoint his own successor, if he were to be forced to step down and he appoints his own successor, would you have confidence that he would appoint somebody who's going to offer a radical change in the way this is going to be managed?
Here's the dilemma in Puerto Rico. You have the Independentista, which want independence for Puerto Rico. They're about 5%. Then you have the Populares, who were very popular at one time, but now they have no, they lost their mission. People are unhappy with the Commonwealth. So really, there's only really one party that holds strength, and they're probably going to win next time. As a result of that, there's no negotiations taking place, Gary. This is not happening in a vacuum. This is not the governor who's going to say it's whoever I want, because they have a carrot, and the carrot is that he don't want to be prosecuted. So the Senate and the Assembly over there.
Boy, it sounds very familiar to what we
very
have
much.
going on in our own federal
So there's
government.
negotiations taking place. My guess is that the president of the Senate is going to become the next governor, and President Chats, and Thomas Chats. He wants the job. Almost nobody, Gary, it's amazing. Nobody wants this job, because you're going to have a year and a half of lack of credibility that has been established in government.
Let's just talk about that for a second, because you and I were talking about that before the show. And you're a leader. You're a political leader. You love your job. I know that, and you take seriously what you do. Would you hypothetically want a job like that you're going to walk into? We know of the history of corruption and waste and mismanagement, but there's also tremendous work to be done to rebuild from Hurricane Maria. And I mean, to step into that, boy, oh boy, I almost can't imagine somebody saying, I can be the hero here.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very difficult situation. We have to be somebody that has a perceived integrity, that people perceive them as having integrity, that have kept the promises, that the private life, public life matches. And then you need somebody who's very good in managing the chaos. There's other people that have committed crimes there. They're still under the ethics. They have an ethics board in Puerto Rico that they are doing investigation, plus the FBI. So it has to be somebody who's willing to clean house.
You said it right at the outset there that all the people are together, all the people see things the same way. You're looking for somebody with integrity. Is there somebody out there? And that's what I was talking about when I was talking about if the people are all on the same page, if you could get a leader that shares their vision, then maybe you could get somewhere because that leader could then mobilize, the populace. Is there a leader out there that people will agree on? And I suspect that Puerto Rican people will coalesce around the right person.
There were a few people that were mentioned when I was down there, and hence, since I came back, I'm still in communication with people influence in Puerto Rico. There's few that are being bounced around. I think that this happened so quickly. When have you seen in 2 weeks a governor or a president literally step down? I mean, this is almost unprecedented. It definitely was unprecedented in the history of Puerto Rico. To have somebody percolate to the top, I think that the unfortunate thing is that we don't have a lot of time. But there are a few. I mean, the former Secretary of State who stepped down because
you think
of what
she
took
would
place.
have been that kind of leader? Had
It's a
she
he.
wanted? No, I was talking about Wanda Vasquez
Yeah, Wanda
Garcia.
had people. She has she's under investigation on 2 accounts.
Right away, that says to me you cross her off the list.
And then prior to that, she's like the Attorney General. She
Right.
failed to prosecute people in their own party, which blatantly people
That's
saw.
not
it's not the kind of person
I
you
keep
want.
thinking of the line from the Bruce Springsteen song, "A savior to rise from these streets." And in a way, that is what you need is, a popular populist leader who can, command the attention of the people, get everybody on the same page. I don't know if it's there. I was going to put the question of statehood toward the end and say, is that? But you suggested it. How do you see it? In other words, what I guess I'm trying to define is a goal.
Right.
To have people protest and say, we don't like this, well, that's one thing, and Rosselló is out. We understand that. And so they protested that. But, to get them to aim for something, is statehood one of the goals that should be aimed
that's
for?
my...
And let me just add that I spoke to one of your colleagues in government, and he said he doesn't support statehood. He's a
Right.
Puerto Rican legislator, and he said he doesn't support statehood.
So, you have right now a Commonwealth that does not work, which actually by international law is illegal. It's really a colony. You can't have what they have right now and function. They can't determine their own future.
You define it as a colony as opposed to a commonwealth.
To me, they're synonymous. They're synonymous because, look, right now we have the junta. We have a board that is literally running Puerto Rico. The government there doesn't have the final word. Right. The government is United States. So right now, we could go either way. We could go statehood or independence. I sympathize with people who say, hey, it's time for us to determine our own future. And I wouldn't shed tears over that. I think Puerto Ricans would do well if they were to do that. I still lean towards statehood, but I'm open-minded because look at the power base that Puerto Rico will have. 6 congressmen and 2 U.S. senators. And Gary, that is exactly why it has not occurred. The Republicans don't want that, okay? And for whatever reason, we Democrats, we missed the boat some years ago when we had both houses and the presidency.
Well, your hesitation about either side is probably shared by other Democrats
Absolutely.
across the country. And so let's get into, just for a moment, the $94 billion that was requested in relief by Rosselló and his government. Congress allocated about half, a little less than half, that $42.3 billion, but only $12.6 billion has been received. On the other hand, the reports have come out that there was waste, that monies and resources sat in the sun and spoiled and didn't get to where they were going. If you are funding, regardless of political party, if you are funding a relief effort and you don't have confidence that that money is going, I tell you, I can sympathize with some people who say, you know what, we're not giving them the money because we're not flushing it down the toilet.
I hear you, Gary, but I don't want Puerto Rico to be treated different from other states. And so when it came down to Florida, when it came down to Houston, and rightly so, they got the funding that they needed. Puerto Rico needs to get their due. Yes, there was corruption. Yes, you had two government officials trying to embezzle $15 million worth of funding. But the reality is the island will not be able to bounce back if we don't get fully funded. And mind you, Puerto Rico.
But it's got to be funded, and that money has got to. We all would want to know. You would,
Yeah,
as
absolutely.
a legislative leader, you would want to know
Absolutely.
that it goes where it's supposed to go.
But right now you have the governmental environment where people are watching, and this is what's missing, I think, in Puerto Rico. We need a better accountability and transparency system, like we have here in the city of New York. Very transparent. It's all online. You know where the money goes, who got it. In order to gain the trust of the people, there has to be transparency. And I think that's what's lacking. And I will hope the next governor will do that. But we still need the funding. Without it, it's not going to happen. Remember, Puerto Rico, because they're not a state, they can't claim bankruptcy. So again, you put Puerto Rico in a situation.
So you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't.
Absolutely.
You know, maybe I should have asked you right at the beginning when we were talking about the protests. What actually are people saying? Aside from saying they didn't want Rosselló to stay in power, what are they saying? What are the conditions they're living in? How do they see themselves getting out of this situation?
You know, the Hurricane Maria hits. I was there helping out.
I
a
remember
couple
you
of
reported to us afterwards. Yes.
And I've been there I was there 3 weeks. We still have so many conditions that are horrific in Puerto Rico. The unemployment rate is so high. You have government. You have 30,000 people that were laid off in government in Puerto Rico. I mean, the numbers are shocking. You have 500,000 people who left Puerto Rico. That affects the economy, Gary. So people, here's the underlying feeling. They're frustrated and they're tired. I tell you that word, estoy cansado. I am tired of going through this from generation to generation and generation. And they had it. And their frustration burst 2 weeks ago. And I'm so proud of them. Like, Gary, I saw 70-year-olds coming from the other side of the island, who we call it Bong. They hitchhike all the way from the other side to be there and stay overnight. We saw children, people from all, I saw religious people, LGBT, all three parties there. I never saw that. We were there in the midst of the sun. I sweated so much the next day my clothes were still wet in the hotel room. It was so hot. But I tell you, we forgot to eat lunch and dinner because of the level of passion. There was a glimpse of hope that if we unite together, we could see a change to the island that we so dearly love.
You know, I mentioned it earlier. The notion of human capital is significant, and frankly, in some of our own American cities here, not to say that Puerto Ricans are not Americans, but some of our mainland cities here, I'd love to see that kind of unity in it. But I guess what I'm still getting at is, what is the end game? In other words, like, let's say we had a massive march about climate change, and everybody knows, well, they want to limit carbon emissions, and then there are specific goals that they want. In Puerto Rico, you're acknowledging that we need new leadership, but we're kind of saying, where does that leadership come from?
Well,
I guess I'm stuck on that.
Oh, Gary, first they need to allow Puerto Ricans to decide what they're going to do with the island, either statehood or independence. They need to allow them. United States, look, 6 times they have voted, and we have turned our backs on Puerto Rico. Come on, they've been there since 1898. We have not allowed Puerto Ricans to decide whether to be statehood or independence. Let them decide. Let's have a vote. In 1960, the United Nations said it's time for Puerto Rico to be able to determine their future. The time is now. We can't. We're going to have some of the same problems over and over and over again.
If you're in, regardless of political party, if you're in the United States government now and you say this is one of our commonwealths and we certainly need to be responsible and support, we know that the funding has not been appropriate and has not gotten to where it's supposed to, what would you do? Would you say, let's fully fund this thing and hope for the best? Or would you work to put an infrastructure in place that would at least assure that taxpayer dollars were spent right?
Well, there was some kind of infrastructure that was put in place that was able to expose the two officials. So there was yeah, and so I think
I'm sorry for laughing.
I know, me too, Gary. But here's the deal. Right now, all eyes are on government officials, and they know they're watching them. I think the level of accountability has risen. I think they need to put laws in place.
You think that is true?
Absolutely. I think.
Do you know some of them? Some of the elected
I know
officials?
some of the elected officials. I know some of the senators and so forth. Right now, you notice that very few ever got in camera?
I did notice.
As a matter of fact, when I was there, and I was the first U.S. mainline elected official to be there, and Melissa Viverito, a former speaker, came the day after, and we were rallying together. I didn't see any elected officials there, and we didn't hear any of them show up because right now they're very paranoid. They don't want to be tagged. But I couldn't emphasize more that we need transparency, Gary. That's what has worked here in the city. And we went through some years. You've been around long enough that you know we did a cleanup here, elected officials. And now you're starting to see the level of integrity begins to rise, the accountability and transparency that you haven't heard too many stories. And if they do, they're exposed and we get them out of the way.
I guess one of the questions I have right in front of me is how deeply rooted is the corruption? So, and I mean, does it infiltrate very far down so
Yes.
that it becomes very difficult to establish the kind of credibility and stability that you're
Gary,
looking for?
it goes all the way to the municipalities. I could tell you that. Listen, during hurricane, I'm not even going to mention the person, but one of the mayors who contact one of the people right here in the Bronx who wanted to help, said, oh yeah, you can send us stuff and we'll make sure it gets to our people, but you got to send us a kilo of cocaine. Come on. Come on,
Again,
Gary.
I'm sorry for
It
that.
is shocking. And
that was
this is why people said enough is enough. And it didn't matter what it took, how long. I mean, this was 24/7 rallies that were taking place. And I think the people are saying enough is enough. We need change, and we need it right now.
You talk to Puerto Ricans in the Bronx, and I'm sure many are saying, gee, willikers, if there's something we could do. Is there something that people could do? Should they write to somebody? Should they? I don't really know. Is there something to be said for? I'm always interested in Bronx people.
I tell you, the influence that happened in social media, Puerto Ricans, I didn't see one of them support the governor of Puerto Rico. That made a difference. The fact that when yeah, absolutely. And it
made a difference.
I think it made a difference. When I went over there and I shared that they're not alone, there was a roar. I have the video. There was a roar. The people were encouraged that they didn't feel alone. And that part means a lot when you have the diaspora that you have here of Puerto Ricans like myself who were raised in Puerto Rico, though we're still connected with our families over there. It means a lot. It creates momentum. It gave them even more traction.
So, if there was advice for the 1/4 of the number of Bronxites that we have, you would say keep communicating, keep being outspoken about what you see and what you hear.
And attend the rallies. Whatever rally was taking place here was emulating the rallies that were taking place over there. They found out what's happening over there, how are they going to do it, where they're going to be, and we emulated that, we modeled it, and it was
fascinating.
Very fascinating.
That is fascinating. We do, as you know, we do a lot of politics on here. We do a lot of issues on here. I'm always mostly interested in human capital. And what I have seen from the outside, not of Puerto Rican descent, what I've seen from the outside is that in response to and protests and in the response to Hurricane Maria, and of course, in this situation, a tremendous unity that you don't see, frankly, in other democratic cultures. There's a lot of pulling and pushing in other places.
Yes,
and I wish there was a way, and maybe you've already just tapped on it, to use that to help people do better, you know, to help this
And people are talking about that. I think it gives them hope that if it happened in Puerto Rico, it could happen elsewhere and even in other countries. So yes, I think it gave us a point of hope that we could extrapolate from.
Back to my question. Your recommendation to the federal government is to release the funds, make sure the funds go. Although I am worried about releasing funds to kind of a place that you don't know where it's actually going.
I think
I don't know that you're running for Congress, but if you were in Congress, what would you recommend?
I would recommend that there will be a system, and I keep coming back to it. You cannot have the funding coming in unless you have a structure and system in place that is transparent, that it guarantees warnings, it alerts.
If something doesn't happen.
Say something doesn't happen the way it's supposed to happen.
In order to do that, if you were in office, you would say, then let's get the system in place. Let's manage it ourselves all the way down because it's our money and we want to make sure it's
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I guess, Council Member, there's a lot we could talk about in your district. We didn't get to any of that. We're pretty much out of time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is really, as I said, for a quarter of the Bronxites. That's hundreds of, almost... there's about 350,000 people. That's a very important thing. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Appreciate it. Folks, if you have further questions or comments on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, then email them to us at bronxtalk@bronxnet.org. Send us a tweet at BronxTalk or post them on our Facebook page. Now, next week, we'll take a look at advocacy for local Bronx parks. Not the big ones, not Van Cortlandt or Pelham Bay, but the local ones that are in your and my communities. Thanks to our producer is Helen Greenberg, the director is William Guzman, Nick Marrera, the cast of thousands who are here, and we'll see you next week. Good night.